All right, good evening out there. Good to see you. Hope you've had a good week and bracing for more wet weather. It's coming, I think. But welcome. Let's see. There's a few things happening you might be interested in, if I can read my writing. But on Saturday is the mother-son dance. So that's for little boys that are birthed to 5th grade, and of course their moms or grandmom or whoever wants to come with them and have some fun with that. It's 5 to 7 on Saturday night. So also Sunday is Mother's Day, and we will not have evening service. Some of us will be traveling that day, but we'll have a nice big banner out front if you'd like to do photos for Mother's Day, and so just keep that in mind. Also, let's see. Also on Sunday we have baptism. So we have at least 3 that I know of that are planning on being baptized. Ladies, the Ecclesiastes study is on the 12th at 6 o'clock. And then men, on Tuesday next week, Men by Design over at Corinth, we need to get a count. So if you're planning on going, just sign up so we can turn that number in to them tomorrow. And it's $15 at the door, cover your meal and everything. But we'll take a group over. We'll leave here. We'll figure out the time exact, let you know Sunday, and ride over to Corinth for that event. So be sure to sign up, guys, tonight if you're planning on going over there, so they'll have adequate food for us. All right. There's a few other things I'll let you look at in there as well, but keep up with some of those if you can. Are y'all getting the phone call announcements? Are y'all seeing and hearing those? And if for some reason you're not, and I know you'd really want to, just let us know in the office, and we can get you on that calling list. We may start doing that more and more, and just doing call-outs once a week with reminders and that sort of thing. So if you are not on that list, if you're not getting them, you can sign up for call and text, and we try to do both a lot of times to kind of let you know what's going on. So just sign up at the office for all of that. All right, Judges chapter 16. The text you've all been waiting for in the study of Samson, right? Interesting stuff, to say the least. Judges 16. I gave you a break last week. We only looked at 3 verses. We're going to do a little more than that tonight, okay? Look at a few more. How many of you remember a boxer by the name of Mike Tyson? I remember Tyson. Well, when Mike Tyson came along, I guess in the 90s, he was one of the most feared boxers out there. His nickname was Iron Mike. That was kind of scary in a way. Pales a little in comparison. Mine does to his. I'm Dr. D. Now, if somebody thinks that means death instead of Daryle, then maybe that's intimidating. But nevertheless, it's okay. But Mike Tyson was pretty dominating. If I remember right, he won his first 19 boxing matches by knockout. I mean, he was the man in the day. He finished his career with 44 knockouts in his 50 victories. He was the youngest undisputed heavyweight champion. I believe he was 20 when he won that. But as dominating as he was, by the end of his career, he was what you might say a shell of himself. And it manifested himself probably in the biggest degree when he fought Evander Holyfield. Y'all remember he took a bite off his ear in a boxing match. That's generally not something you do in a boxing match, but that's what he may be remembered for the most. He won, I believe it was 5 out of his last 12 fights. When we think of him, we think about the ear situation, think about him maybe going to prison. If you saw him in recent years, maybe the tattoo that's on his face that he had done, that you can't help but wonder, what was he thinking in the midst of all of that? And obviously he's dealing with a lot of things to be fair. There's a lot going on in his life that affected a lot of those things. But his career ended a little bit different than it started. Started off so strong, but ended up struggling. And we see that all the time. That can happen in Christian life as well. If we're not careful, we can go down some roads that'll cause the end of our life and journey to end up a little bit rough and tough. There's people all the time that compromise their principles, and they end up in a mess toward the end of things. And so things can quickly change, things can quickly fade, and we need to listen to some of the scriptures in the sense, beware lest you fall into temptation also, lest you fall also, and learn from that. Well, Samson is one who started off his career, if you will, very strong, dominant fashion. And we get to chapter 16, and particularly the encounter here and situation with Daryle, and we see things really start to fade more and more and more to a pretty drastic conclusion to the verses we're going to look at tonight. So let's talk about fading fast. It happens somewhat quick, but really it's happened over the course of years and years and years, as we've seen these past few weeks. But we're going to start in verse 4 of Judges 16, and we're going to look down really through verse 22 tonight. And just for the sake of time, we're just going to jump in and dive in. So in verse 4, I want us to think about this, that love is not always mutual. And it tells us that afterward it happened that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Daryle. Now the word for love does mean love. And so for him, whatever capacity you may put that with in Samson's life, most say it was equivalent more so to lust than love, but it says love, and that's the way it's translated the vast majority of times in the Old Testament. Whatever feelings he had toward her was pretty strong for him. But what we find out in the verses that follow is that it was not mutual. She didn't love him at all. You might could say she probably didn't like him very much because of what she does. And so it's not always a mutual thing. You might could call this a fatal attraction because that's about how it ended up in so many ways. Somebody said it this way: Samson was a he-man with a she-weakness. It's a pretty good statement, isn't it? And certainly it was. This is the third lady that we encounter him with. It's probably none were good or right for him. It was something he wrestled with and struggled with over and over. And I read about an older gentleman who was asked by a younger man if his age kept him from being tempted sexually. And the older man replied, the only time he'd feel safe from temptation like that is when he was 6 feet under. Meaning, no, it's something he would forever wrestle with, and for many men that certainly is true and the case. Daryle, her name means delicate or feeble, in the sense maybe to make one feeble, which is what she does to Samson. Now, I don't know about you, but through the years, you typically, when you think about Daryle, you probably think Philistine. But we don't know that. It doesn't tell us that she was a Philistine. Matter of fact, her name is a Hebrew name, which might make sense because the Old Testament's written in Hebrew predominantly, but it's a Hebrew name that's used. Doesn't necessarily mean she's an Israelite by any respect, but it doesn't necessarily tell us that she was a Philistine. She's aligned with them. Some you might read about would say she's even a temple prostitute, which would have been quite common for Philistines and Dagon, their god, to worship in that way. But we don't know a lot about her. But it does give us her name compared to the other two ladies in Samson's life. It doesn't tell us them. But he loved her, and talks about from the valley of Sorek. This is where Samson would have spent a large portion of his life. A lot of years would have been spent in that valley. And he has this love toward Daryle, but it's not always mutual. Second thought is this: the love of money can entice. And so in verse 5, that the lords or the rulers of the Philistines came up to her and they said to her, entice him, find out where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to afflict him, and every one of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver. 1,100 pieces of silver. Now, we don't have an exact figure of that, but they would say this is thousands upon thousands of dollars that they would give. Philistines, there were 5 major cities. Most would say the rulers or the leaders that come together is probably the 5 of those cities, those main leaders. And they come together to Daryle, knowing her relationship with Samson, really how he feels about her, and they make a proposition for her to entice him. It means to seduce, to persuade, to deceive, to flatter or allure him. Now, she's already got him, all right? The verse before talked about he loved her. And so he's got this attraction toward her, which is really strong. And so they come up with the plot and the plan to entice him. Find out this great strength, where it's at, how does he get it? We want to overpower him. We want to bind him up. We want to afflict him, which really means to humble or humiliate him. This was the intent. Why? Because, well, that's what he did to them, wasn't it? If you were here last week and talked about how he goes and literally takes hold of the doors of the gate, he picks it up and carries it ever how far and sets it down from that city of Gaza. So this was personal for them. They wanted him to pay and to pay dearly, and they couldn't wait to get him. And they were willing to pay big time for it. People will do a lot of things for money. They will bend the rules. They'll break the rules. They'll lie, cheat, steal. They'll even murder. And the Bible tells us about that. The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, isn't it? And so it's certainly the case here for Daryle. Whatever she felt toward Samson, she felt a little more toward that money, toward that silver that they're offering her, to where she's willing to go to this length to get him, to really embarrass and humiliate him in front of the Philistines. So the love of money can entice. Starting in 6, and this is the big bulk of the passage, although you can break it down into several small sections. But its deception can be destructive or dangerous or even deadly. And so this plan is in place to entice or deceive, and that's what begins to take place. And so there's several little segments, verses 6 through 9, 10 through 12, 13 and 14, and then 15 through 20, different little breakdowns. But it says, Daryle said to Samson, "Please tell me where your great strength lies, and with what you may be bound to afflict you." Now, I don't know about you. I read that verse, and I think, okay, somebody asked me, where does my strength lie? Well, okay, but so that you may be bound, so that we can afflict you. Same word that was just used, that we can humble and humiliate you. I think I would, kind of scratch my head and be like, maybe I shouldn't give that information out. I don't know. But y'all ever heard love is blind? Whatever he's thinking and feeling, he is blind to the point you could argue he seems to be lacking wisdom and common sense when it comes to this whole situation. So she wants him to tell her where his strength is found. So Samson says, "Well, if they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings, not yet dried, then I shall become weak and be like any other man." So the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 fresh bowstrings, not yet dried. She bound him with them. Now men were lying in wait, staying with her in the room, and she said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." But he broke the bowstrings, and as a strand of yarn breaks when it touches fire, so the secret of his strength was not known. Now you got to use your imagination a little bit with this. I know as a kid, when we saw this acted out, it had the Philistines just rush in and him fight them off after he broke through, and he would fight them off. We don't necessarily know that's what happened. It seems like they're there, they're lying in wait, they're being real secretive. It's actually the same phrase we talked about last week as the soldiers, those Philistines, were lying in wait all night at the gate. It's the same word that's used here. They're lying in wait in the room. Typically, homes aren't very big, Maybe they're in that room. Maybe they're just right outside in a different room. We don't know, but she wakes him up. The Philistines are upon you, and he just breaks through, and that's really all it says happens. The soldiers may never have actually come out. They were wanting to see if this was true. So Delilah says to Samson, look, you have mocked me and told me lies, meaning you have deceived me and lied to me. That's kind of funny because that's exactly what she's doing to him. But she tells him, this is what you're doing to me. So please tell me what you may be bound with. So he said to her, well, if they bind me securely with new ropes that have never been used, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. Therefore Delilah took new ropes and bound him with them and said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. The men were lying in wait, staying in the room, but he broke them off his arms like a thread. So 2 times we see she binds him with these things, and you wonder, is he just letting her tie him up? Doesn't tell us at this part that he's fallen asleep. That's later on. Why is all this happening? Why is his judgment just completely gone, where it's so messed up and he's making these decisions? It's kind of scary to think how we can be affected by our feelings, by our emotions, and it can cause us to do unthinkable things and say things and do things like this. But here he goes again. So Delilah says, until now you've mocked me, you've told me lies. Tell me what you may be bound with. He said to her, if you weave the 7 locks of my head into the web of the loom. So she wove it tightly with the batten and the loom and said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he awoke from his sleep, pulled out the batten and the web from the loom. You ever wonder exactly how long his hair had to be at this point in life? It has to be pretty long, doesn't it? I don't have a lot to go with that. I got 2 individuals that come to mind. I remember a lady by the name of Crystal Gale that used to sing. Y'all remember her? And her hair came down past the back of her knees. I remember that. And then I remember Cousin It, from the Addams Family. I don't know how long or what his hair had to look like. I mean, it had to be pretty long. In a way, you could argue it might have been pretty obvious he never cut his hair, right? I don't know, but obviously he's a big dude. He's a strong dude. He stood out in a big way. But you wonder, what did that hair look like? I mean, how long was it actually? And to be honest, you wonder why nobody ever thought, you ever had a haircut? You ever gone somewhere and trimmed it at all or any of those things or asked? But that didn't click, even to the point where she's braiding it up like this loom and getting it ready, but still to no effect. He awakes at this point, pulls out the batten and web from the loom. So she says to him, how can you say I love you? Oh, be careful when you hear things like that, right? Oh, if you love me, you'll do this and that. When your heart is just not with me. She's playing the game extremely well, isn't she? Her heart's not with him in any way, shape, or form. She literally wants to get paid no matter what they're going to do to him. She just wants the money. But, Samson, how can you say you love me and your heart's just so far away from me? It's not with me. You've mocked me these 3 times and have not told me where your great strength lies. And it came to pass when she pestered him daily with her words and pressed him so that his soul was vexed to death, that he told her all his heart and said to her, no razor has ever come upon my head, for I have been a Nazirite to God from my mother's womb. If I am shaven, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man. Y'all thought like I've thought, why would he divulge that information? When 3 times he's told her where his strength comes, not being truthful, but found himself bound or what he said done, she has proven she would do whatever it takes to help him get rid of his strength, right? She wants to find it out. And yet, in the moment, and it says that she pestered him, or the idea that she really does stress and de-stress him and even oppress him to that point. The second thought is used, pressed, and urged is another word that can be used there, so that his soul is just vexed to death. It's grieved. He's discouraged. He's like, fine, whatever, enough's enough. And he tells her. He knew, but he didn't know. He knew of his strength, but he didn't really know the source of his strength. Didn't really believe it was going to affect everything, and yet we know that it would. And so there's a lot of pride that's going on in his life. There was a young preacher. He was maybe not full pages like I do, because I need to be able to see. I need bigger print now. But he would do his sermons, and he would have it printed on particular paper in really neat, nice fashion, and he would use this week after week. And one day there was a lady in the congregation who had been talking to him and asking for copies of his sermons over and over, time and again, week after week. And finally, on this particular day, he was just kind of had a little pride about him, and he was like, so what do you do with all these things? And this was her response. She says, they are the perfect size for the bottom of my bird cage. And so that's what it was. They were fit perfectly in the little cage, and so that's what she used them for. That's why you don't ask questions like that. You might get an answer that you don't want to hear and you don't want to know. Samson has a lot of pride about him. He does let us know we got to be careful where we lay our head. And he's laying his head in deep deception with someone who really could care less about him. He allowed his relationship with Delilah to take priority over his commitment to God, and it cost him very, very dearly. It says, when Delilah saw that he told her all his heart, she sent and called for the lords of the Philistines, those rulers. He said, come up once more, for he has told me all his heart. She knew this was truth. So the lords of the Philistines came up to her, brought the money in their hand. She lulled him to sleep on her knees, called for a man and had him shave off 7 locks of his head. Then she began to torment him. Torment, same word as afflict that we've seen a couple times already. Idea is really humble, humiliate in whatever way. His strength left him. And the sad part is he didn't even know it. She said, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. So he awoke from his sleep, and he said, I will go out as before at other times and shake myself free. But he did not know the Lord had departed from him. How sad. He didn't even realize his strength was gone. Did he know his hair was gone? I got a feeling he would. That couldn't have been light, right? It had to, when it was gone, had to feel very, very different than he had ever felt before. But he didn't know the Lord had departed. And so since the Lord departed, the strength departed. And it's one of the sadder verses in all the Bible. Verse 21 tells us there's a price for disobedience or pride. You know, Samson had to be a really hard sleeper. Any of y'all hard sleepers out there? Nothing seems to wake you up? Yeah. There's a few. Some are really light sleepers. Everything wakes you up. I get it. He had to be a pretty hard sleeper to go through some of those things and not realize what was going on. But look at verse 21. It says, then the Philistines took him, put out his eyes, brought him down to Gaza. They bound him with bronze fetters, and he became a grinder in the prison. Some scholars would say that work was for women or even women slaves or whoever it might be that they would use. But they are using the great Samson to humiliate him and make fun of him and put him in a position like this, but they take him and they put out his eyes. I can't imagine what that's like. I've read other stories about that and believers having their eyes put out along the way. But they do that and then they take him to Gaza. They bind him up, even more so because it seems like he was probably already bound and he couldn't have escaped even from that last situation. They bind him more so, and he begins to work in that prison. One commentator said Samson was captivated by Delilah's beauty and by lust. Day by day, he lost control until finally he lost all of his strength. He realized too late he could not set himself free. He realized too late that the one vital piece of his life was missing. There's such a price for disobedience and pride. Now, if we stop there, this story would seem so sad, wouldn't it? And it is sad. But the next verse, you could argue, is one of the most remarkable and promising verses in the Bible. There is hope in the Lord. Because verse 22 says, however, the hair of his head began to grow again after it had been shaven. That doesn't sound like much, but that's hope. That's opportunity. That's planting a seed for what would come down the road. That's giving us the opportunity to think, even when we mess up and fail to the utmost degree, there's still hope for some healing and some restoration. Because it wasn't so much about his hair, it was about his heart. And the hair was gone and it starts to grow back, but it's really more than that. Obviously, the hair symbolizes his strength would come back, but more important than that, his heart begins to grow. As he would turn more and more to the Lord in the midst of this. And it reminds us, at our lowest points in life, where do we go? We go to the Lord. We go to the Lord. Even when we've messed up, even when we hit rock bottom. I mean, it's hard for us to put ourselves in his shoes because nobody has strength quite like that. Nobody would have been looked at like that. I mean, he was a hero to his people. He had this great power when the Lord would move upon him, and he did incredible things, and now all of a sudden, he's a shell of himself. Those locks of hair are gone. They're no more. He looks different. His eyes have been gouged out. He'll never see again. However, the hair of his head began to grow again. Aren't you thankful for the agains in life? Aren't you thankful God gives us hope and an opportunity, even when we're at the bottom, to realize there's more, that God's still there, that he didn't just wash away and it's all done and we're history. He allows us again to come back, to repent. And that's the hope of verse 22. Again, verse 20, one of the saddest verses in all the Bible. Verse 22, promising verses in all the Bible. We can fade fast. And although in this case it's going to take a little while for some things to be restored and healed, but you know what? We can, with God's help, we can actually climb fast too. And it has to be with his help. Y'all ever tried running uphill? That's tough. That's really tough. But we can do it with his help. And so we can go down in a hurry. We all know that, and we've probably all been there. But God can also pick us back up, and he can give us opportunity and make us whole again. And I am so thankful that even though we may drift, he still heals and holds hope and restores us. Because again, it's not about the hair. That was an outward sign, a visible thing. It was something he was supposed to do, not to have it cut. but it was more the outward symbol of what God had put in his heart and called him to do, which was to lead his people. And in the midst of his despair, he would come to that realization, there's still something I can do to help my people. His whole life had been built around who he was and that great strength he had, and what we'll see is he would end it with, it's not about me, it's about others. And it's about helping the people God called him to judge and to lead, even in moments like that. And so, let's rejoice thanking God for the again and the again and the again, for sufficient grace, even when we struggle and fall short. Let's pray. Father, thank you for tonight. Thank you for what we see and hear about Samson's life. And it is a deep tragedy, what happened and took place. It reminds us of our own lives and decisions we can make sometime when we try to do things on our own, or we think we're bigger than you, or we've got it all figured out, or when we just get blinded to truth and reality and what's going on. Lord, I pray that you would help use these verses and what we see in Samson's life and his power and strength and how things can be stripped and taken away in just a moment. But Lord, thank you for the agains, for the healing, for the hope that we have in you. And Lord, when we cry out, you hear us. You long to hear our voices, to say, God, please, one more time, help me, use me, make me something more than what I am. Lord, you be blessed in our lives tonight. Help us to be open and honest, who we are, but Lord, who you've called us to be. And I pray that you would use us for your glory. In Jesus' name, amen.